All right. Hi, I'm Mike Zyda, and today's presentation is entitled UC San Diego, the Census Bureau, 1973 to 1976. And this is an organization that I was part of as an undergraduate. It was a key role in my career success. And so I want to talk a little bit about what that organization did in 1973 to 76 and how how did it turn out for all the people who worked there that I worked with. So it's put the slides up and we'll go through that. Share slides. Slides. There. Okay. We are shared. Put it on play. All right. Census Bureau. The Census Bureau was located on the second floor of Urey Hall, which is the picture on the right. And what's amazing about putting this talk together is I don't have hardly any pictures from back then. And I don't have any pictures of the work I did at the Census Bureau or the people from back then, hardly. But Urey Hall is there, and this is before the fountain was built, right? Which is the fountain should be right to the right of this picture. Maybe it's there, it's just focused not on it. Anyway, the Census Bureau, as in the senses of your perception mechanisms of your body. All right. The Census Bureau was founded by a Professor Kent R. Wilson, and I'm going to go through the organization of the Census Bureau, the people I worked with, what did we have access to, what did we create, career impact, and what happened to the Census Bureau. The Census Bureau was founded by Kent R. Wilson, professor of chemistry. Kent passed in 2000. He was just a dynamic person who could get students to come in with as freshmen and do fantastic work in his lab. So he had an undergraduate research group called the Census Bureau. And his resume, we should go through a little bit. He's professor of chemistry and biochemistry at University of California, San Diego, UCSD. In the late 60s, he and his research group developed the technique of photofragment spectroscopy that enabled them to probe the unstable states of molecules. In the 1970s, he used laser spectroscopy to unveil the chemistry of atmospheric pollution. In the 1980s, he combined ultra-fast laser experiments with computer simulations to develop an understanding of how reactions occur in solution. In the past 90s, he led a very ambitious effort to use ultra-fast beams of X-rays to probe and control chemistry. The techniques developed by Kent Wilson have had widespread application in fields as diverse as atmospheric pollution, ancient statue dating, chemical reactions in liquids, and the development of pulsed X-ray sources and laser microscopes for use in sophisticated analysis of biological systems. So he did great stuff. He's also one of the most innovative teachers at UC San Diego. For 30 years, he pioneered the use of visualization technologies to make science more accessible to students of all ages. Many a student or postdoc researcher at UCSD remembered seeing Professor Wilson's films even in high school. He brought films and other visualization techniques to the classroom when these technologies were in their infancy. Instead of employing professional programmers in this effort, he relied on a hand-picked team of some of the brightest undergraduate students he brought together in a group he dubbed the Census Bureau. Some of these students passed up other opportunities and specifically came to UCSD because of Professor Wilson's legendary invitation, their first opportunity to experience his formidable talents in the art of persuasion and negotiation. And there we are, the Urey Hall once again, with the fountain. It says, on the fountain, it says, ambition and love are the wings to great deeds. And this is a Goethe quote put there by J. Floyd Andrews, who was the CEO for Pacific Southwest Airlines, if anyone remembers that airline. So this is from 1973 to 76, which are the years I was at UCSD and in the Census Bureau. And the organization Census Bureau starts out with how Kent selected people for the Census Bureau. And he had access to the academic records of incoming freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and he and his team would interview the top 10 of each class for potential positions in the Census Bureau. one of the most interesting things is he had access to incoming freshmen. And for incoming freshmen, he would actually send them a letter inviting them to come and be part of the Census Bureau. For the rest of the people, he would actually have the current Census Bureau and himself and some of his researchers interview the people who for potential positions. And he also advertised in the campus newspaper, Triton Times, for particular skilled undergrads. That's how I got there. Not as an invite, not as one of the best students, but I answered an ad in the paper that said he was looking for a film editor, and I had learned how to edit TV commercials in between high school and college. All right. At San Fernando Valley State College, which is now called Cal State Northridge. The Census Bureau charter, I wrote this charter myself, but to try and capture what was how things were thought of at the organization. And we want people with the desire to invent and build something interesting, something that hasn't been done before. And we want people who can work and build together in a team. We want people willing to learn how to write grant proposals and actually write proposals based on their invention desires. This is kind of what the charter of the Census Bureau was. It was never written down. I wrote it down for this presentation just to give you a thought of if you were going to put together a new version of the Census Bureau, this is still core. So for me, Kent asked me three questions. He's asked, was I willing to learn how to program a computer? And this is 1973. I think it's May 1973, in fact, just about the end of the semester for my first year at UC San Diego as a freshman. Was I willing to learn how to build something interesting with computer graphics? And I actually was already interested in computer graphics. I just couldn't get into that class. Jeff Raskin said the class was full. You can't come to my class. So was I willing to learn how to write grant proposals? And that was probably the most startling part. And I said I was willing to learn. So this is kind of how I wrote the sort of the organization and the way things happen there. And the funding sources for undergrads, you think about, we want to pay them some hourly rate, 20 hours a week to come work in the lab. And we had funding from the National Science Foundation Student Originated Studies Program, which meant that somebody wrote a proposal, an undergrad, who wrote a proposal and talked the NSF into funding that proposal and providing money for undergrads basically to spend a summer working on something. We had money from the National Institute of Health. We had money from the Regents of the University of California. Regents of the University of California had a program probably meant for faculty, which was you write a proposal to start a new research area, and the University of California will seed that you with something 50,000, 150,000 back then to build this project. And also Kent's outside consulting. So Kent did a lot of interesting consulting in Latin America and all kinds of different places overseas where he would learn about what were the interesting businesses in those cities down in Mexico or Latin America. And he would acquire equity in those companies at a particular time. And he had a mathematical model. He used, I think, the mathematics of statistical thermodynamics to predict when would that company boom on the stock market. And he became very wealthy, evidently, and was able to start funding his own research out of his own pocket as a professor and to the Census Bureau. People in the Census Bureau, I always liked that fountain. We had undergraduates, we had graduate students, we had PhD scientists, we had staff, we had others nearby. Others nearby were people who seemed to work with us, but they were working for someone else, really, or they were helpful. So here's some of the undergrads I interacted with. I interacted with Bud Tribble, Bill Atkinson, Tom Webster, Betsy Mull, Bruce Gardner, Barry Carlton, Tom Richard, Scott Anderson. And I think these are the ones I could think of right off that I directly interacted with. And these were all super brilliant people. And it was great because had a lab where we could do really cool things. Here's some PhD people that we worked with. Robert Clear, Bob Clear, Bob Sander, Barbara Elkus, Lake Marabo. They all had their PhDs already. They were working in and around Kent's lab, and a lot of them worked with the Census Bureau. Other people nearby, Harold Urey. Uh, I was in Urey Hall. Harold Urey's office was just down the hall from me. And he's an American physical chemist whose pioneering work on isotopes earned him the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1934 for the discovery of deuterium. So when I was meeting with him, it's probably 1973, 74, about, what is that, 40 years after um, he got his Nobel Prize. So he's a pretty old guy, still working. And he was doing work on moon rocks, trying to discover DNA inside of moon rocks or something like that. Arthur David Olson. Arthur David Olson, if you knew him, is an interesting character. And he maintained the Unix and Linux time zone database. He actually created it. And you know you're awesome when IANA has to develop a transitioning strategy when you retire. So he kept this up all the way until he retired. I think he was at NIST, the National Institute for Science and Technology. John Cornelius was the head of the Chemistry Department Computer Center. We had Steve Pomeroy, staff of the Chemistry Department Computer Center. Steve Pomeroy at one time was involved in a project to do the chemical testing of the Shroud of Turin, which is pretty funny. Anyway, he was around there, very, very kind person. Steve Shaw, staff of the Chemistry Department Computer Center. And he is one of the first 20 employees at Electronic Arts and at Amiga. Very brilliant guy. And he changed his major every quarter while I was a student at UCSD. He was a roommate of ours in UCSD, also 1974 to 76. We had Noel Bartlett. Noel Bartlett was this old sound engineer from the film industry, and he was in the film industry from 1939 to 1975, and a general engineer for help with building things in the lab. So he's just a great guy. And I think at one time I asked him, was he ever in any films? And I was in The Big Parade, which is a silent film from a long time before that even. So I'm not sure if that's true, by the way. That's what he told me. Great, wonderful person, silver hair, and pretty helpful in building robots and whatever you wanted to build in the lab. What do we have access to in the Census Bureau? Well, this is the panel of the IBM 1800 computer that we had. And it's funny because it's a really big computer. It's much wider than your kitchen probably. And it used to be a shipboard computer for the Scripps Institute of Oceanography, and somehow they jettisoned it, and we got to have this. And this is a computer you program with punch cards, all right? And I think it had like 18,000 18-bit words. It was a really strange computer. We all had offices and lab space in the second floor of your hall. So if you're undergrad and you have an office and a lab space, that's pretty cool. We also had access to Kent's lab, to Kent's office, and he had a library there. He actually told me I could use his office at night if I wanted to get away from living in the noisy dorms. And I would go over there, I would get my homework done, and then I would start reading my way through his books. So I read through all his physical chemistry books. I read through all of his neuroscience books. And I was just like, this is completely awesome. And if I ran out of books in his office, I could go downstairs to the Science and Engineering Library on the first floor of Erie Hall. We actually all had keys. Well, keys to the back door. Somehow the lab key opened the back door of the Science and Engineering Laboratory. That's pretty fun. Chemistry lab, lasers. You know, we are 18 years old when we're here. We have lasers and chemicals. Great. We had a single frame animation camera with filter flipper for color graphics recording. We had a budget for 16 millimeter film purchase and 16 millimeter film development at a place in downtown San Diego. We also had ARPANET. We had ARPANET in 1973, 74, when we were there at UC San Diego as undergrads. And it's very early ARPANET. We were trying to use it to transmit data from UCLA down to UC San Diego. And what we discovered is that the speed was so slow that it would be faster if we drove up to UCLA and gave them a 9-track tape and had them put the data on the tape, and we brought it, if we could bring it back to San Diego and La Jolla, and it would be faster than trying to download the network, the data off across the network. So computers, I said IBM 1800 with attached storage oscilloscope. It also had these massive drives that shook like this that held 10 megabytes of data each. We had 4 of them. And they're big, they're like stacked pizza pies. We also had a PDP-11 running RTS-11, if anybody remembers that, and later Unix. Attached was a floating point systems array processor, which is basically like a GPU today, which is you could put together the equation that you wanted to run on some data, and you could send the data, the data's in as vector form and get back a vector of answers. We also had lorgnettes for real-time color and stereo viewing. So it was a spinning disc that you held in front of your face, and you could either see color or you could see stereo of the line drawing on the picture system 1 here. So we had all kinds of cool stuff to do and have and work with. We did projects with it, but we also could use the computers for our homework, which was super helpful when we had to do the chemistry lab and figure out what percentage of what is in this vial we gave you. And we could actually do some really cool statistics with it. All right. What do we create in the Census Bureau? Well, lots of things. Lots of things. And there was one thing that got us all excited about the Census Bureau when we arrived about the 1973, 72 timeframe was they had done this film called Protein Synthesis, which was a dance film. And this is before any of us got there. And it was shown to all of us at the start of the summer of 1973 as an idea of how do you present something visually such that it would get people very excited about that field and go into that field. And so this is a very famous film from that era. I think it was shot at Stanford University because one of the guys who was working in the Census Bureau, I think Gabe Weiss ended up at Stanford after he had graduated in medical school. And so he's able to get and use the football field at Stanford for the film. We had another film, an animated film that came out in 1973, which was shown at the very first ACM Computer Animation Festival ever in 1974. So you imagine making an animated film that's shown at the first ACM Computer Animated Festival. This is before SIGGRAPH existed. Or SIGGRAPH was about the cusp in 74, but this is outside of that. We made a film, Deorbital, molecular wave function animations, the touchy-feely device, the brain film. These were all really cool projects inside the Census Bureau. So here's the protein synthesis. This is a single image I took out of the film where they're trying to show how the ribosome works from protein synthesis. This, again, Tainted Sky is an animated film, and I worked to complete this film. This film was done by Bill Atkinson, Bud Tribble, and whoever else was hanging around. And they showed me a cut of it, and they said, we don't like it. And they said, yeah, you're telling too much. They had there was no pause in between each image. It was just constant talking. And so I actually helped them change that and help them complete the film. But they had already done the credits, so I'm not in the credits. But this is a thing I worked on, and this is showing the air pollution over time over the Los Angeles, Orange County, San Bernardino, Riverside Air Basin. It's very cool. It's on YouTube. You can go find it. I did a film called Deorbital, 1973. It's kind of like this picture without the coordinate system. Basically, I was learning how to generate these point clouds so they look kind of random that matched with the wave function of the deorbital. I did a molecular wave function animation series in 1974. I received these wave functions from Ralph Christofferson, who was, I think, at Kansas State, something like that. And they came on paper. They were like a printout on computer paper. And I had to find one of the great things is the computer center at UC San Diego had people who would type this up, all the wave function values into punch cards for me so that I could then plug them in and compute and draw pictures kind of like this. We built this thing called the touchy-feely device. It's a haptic device for molecular interaction force display. So you can't really see it in this picture, probably not when it gets to video. There's a ball in the middle, and there's a tetrahedron of wires, and that tetrahedron of wires would would move would give you force back against you when you move the ball around, depending on what force you programmed it to match. So this picture is not from the touchy-feely device, but it's a picture of the Japanese spider system, which came out 10 years after the touchy-feely. And I looked in my records. There are no pictures that I have of touchy-feely. But there is a paper on it that you can get. This is in Computers and Graphics, a very prestigious European journal in the field of computer graphics. Bill Atkinson, Karen Bond, Bud Tribble, Kent Wilson put this out, and you can go read it. It gives you the full math of how to do the force and position with the tetrahedron of wires. I'm the person who implemented that for the actual touchy-feely device. It was kind of fun. It was fun, except for if you made a mistake in programming and it pulled the wire so hard that it snapped and almost sliced your hand off. Yes, this is a fun thing. We had so there were the people I worked with directly were pretty awesome. We did great things. But there's another woman who hung around with us, Candy Goucher, and she worked on a project all by herself with Kent. And it published this paper, Lead Isotope Studies of Metal Sources for Ancient Nigerian Bronzes. And she wrote this proposal to get some money to go to Africa to collect Nigerian bronzes and figure out their lead isotope content so that she could figure out the trade routes in Nigeria, which is pretty cool. And she ended up being a professor at Washington State University in Vancouver. Washington State University, Vancouver. What else? The brain film. This was cool. This made it to the cover of Scientific American in 1979. It's made from brain slices, digitized by hand by Bill Atkinson. So the brains were mounted in in paraffin, and then there was a microtome that cuts individual slices. And then a picture would be taken of each slice, and then Bill Atkinson projected all of those slices onto paper, and he digitized those slices by going around the structures that you could see and making a data set to show the brain. We've got the cerebellum here, right? Did the color test for this film, which was we were trying to choose particular colors for the different parts of the brain, structures of the brain. Oh, we were also really good about writing technical papers. And this is one with Scott Anderson and Bruce Gardner and Betsy Mull and Guy Tribble and Thomas Webster, Kent Wilson, and Michael Zyda. It's alphabetical order. Yes, it's entitled Correlation Between Air Pollution and Socioeconomic Factors in Los Angeles County. And this was a NSF student-originated study project, which is, funded by NSF to a student group. And what we were doing was trying to take air pollution values for the Los Angeles Air Basin and using the 1970 census data to figure out if you were poor, did you get bad air? That's the fundamental here. And where we were able to get where did poor people and rich people live data was from the census. And that was the data we needed to go to UCLA to get the 9-track tape for. And that was a very fun project, especially, you're an undergrad, you could go to UCLA and hang out. I mean, UCLA in 1973 was a beautiful campus. There were actually paved walkways between buildings as opposed to, UC San Diego in 1973. It was dirt between the campuses. So it was quite different. It rained. You did not want to have your bicycle out. Anyway, there's a great paper about this. And What we discovered is that rich people had bad air just as much as the poor people because there's no boundaries for bad air, right? All right, we could have figured that out. We did another student-originated studies project, and this was a study to come up with a study on the contribution of air to the air pollution of San Diego from the neighboring city of Tijuana, which gave us all an excuse to go down to Tijuana with these hand counters and count the number of cars on the major avenues through Tijuana. And we had an average number of pollution that was coming out. Basically, at the time, this is probably 1974, 75, when we were doing this, is a car that was 3 years old. Basically, the catalytic, the catalytic converter no longer worked and it just polluted full bore. So we had to carry out counting as well as writing down the year of the car if we could figure it out, and then come back and turn that into a model. Career impact. I put this picture in because two of the Census Bureau people I work with are in this picture. We had Bud Tribble, Bill Atkinson, Tom Webster, Betsy Mull, Bruce Gardner, Barry Carlton, Tom Richard, Scott Anderson. Bill Atkinson is in the blue sweater on the in the middle. Bud Tribble is right next to him, and then Steve Jobs, and Andy Hertzfeld is the what is that reddish shirt. Um, Bill Atkinson went from Census Bureau to University of Washington in Seattle, where he stood for a year. And then Jeff Raskin said, Bill, we need you down here at Apple Computer. And so he went down and Bill wrote, I think, QuickDraw. And then he wrote McPaint and HyperCard at Apple. And I think in 1989, he went off to General Magic. But Bill was my close friend in the Census Bureau. He and I used to hang out and do crazy stuff, like climb up elevator shafts and go through ductwork to go down into the tunnels down below the school. And Bill was a wild man. Bill's a total wild man and great fun person to know. Uh, Bud Tribble, Bud ended up being the person who taught me how to do assembly code. He's a super brilliant guy, and he's lives around the corner from me here in Carmel by the sea. And he and my wife and I were all roommates in 1974 through 75. Career-wise, this is me. I threw everything. Here's one slide. What did I do? I founded USC Games. I am an ACM fellow. I'm an IEEE fellow. I'm a fellow of the Asia Pacific Artificial Intelligence Association. I was a senior editor for the MIT Press Journal Presence. I wrote the operating plan and research plan that founded the USC Institute for Creative Technologies. I chaired a number of National Research Council committees. Probably the most important two are virtual reality scientific and technological challenges. I didn't share that. I was just part of it. I wrote 1/3 of the book. Every chapter had the word computer in it. Modeling and simulation linking entertainment defense. I chaired that committee. That is probably the most impactful report ever out of the National Research Council. It changed the entire way the Department of Defense did modeling and simulation into using game technologies. I co-wrote this book, Network Virtual Environments, with Sandeep Singhal. This book ended up being the core behind all of modern network infrastructures for network games. You can see in Chinese here, it says I'm a consultant for the Ministry of Culture in Shanxi Province for all the historic museums, including the Terracotta Warriors Museum. I founded the I3D Conference. I founded the Moves Institute. And the design in the New Millennium National Research Council report starts out with a short story, which I co-wrote with the NRC handler for this study. Tom Webster, professor, School of Public Health, Boston University. He just retired. Betsy Mull became a writer for various media outlets on spiritual healing. She's a leader of the Healing Center International. Bruce Gardner is a scientist and drug product process development guy. He's worked at Genentech and Amgen and Bayer. Super brilliant guy. Was hanging out with us at the Census Bureau. Barry Carlton, he's retired. He was a deputy attorney general for San Diego and a photographer. He's still a photographer. Scott Anderson's MD, PhD. I don't know what universities he is at this point or where he is. And here's this, final question, which is what happened to the Census Bureau? As you can see, I'm a big fan of this organization. It changed the way I taught at USC, which was I made everything project-based. I did this at the Naval Postgraduate School. Instead of multiple choice tests, I made my students build stuff. And if they had to build stuff using some or part of the knowledge in the class, they would eventually be smarter about what they got out of the class. And the entire games program at USC that I founded was based on that. And it still is. It's the number one program in the world. What happened to the Census Bureau? Well, 1996, Kent Wilson had a Festschrift for his 60th birthday at the La Jolla Shores Hotel. He had 250 former students and postdocs attend, and he paid for it all out of his own pocket. And what we found was that half of that 250 people were tenured professors at some university somewhere, and the other half had founded 40 startups. Okay? So this group of people that came through Kent's lab that worked in the Census Bureau, that worked in and around the Census Bureau, all did great things. At that time, Kent already was suffering from prostate cancer, and it was my understanding from previous talks with him that he had funded one of the current PhD scientists to take over the Census Bureau on his passing, which was in 2000. But that individual left UC San Diego in 2001, a short while after Kent's passing. And so there's no longer a Census Bureau at UC San Diego. And if there was a way for that to be recreated in some form, maybe it already exists in some form, that would be awesome. Probably a lot of the universities have a maker organization now that students can get to on campus is pretty much what Census Bureau probably was the creation, sort of one of the seeds to start in that direction. Anyway, it was a great impact in my career and many other people's careers, and including the iPhone you carry. This is my email. This is my website, and thank you for paying attention to my presentation. I will stop sharing that and say, have a great day. And Census Bureau was a huge part of my life. Anyway, have a great evening. Bye-bye.